It's been an amazing time for boxing in the last week or two, particularly if you're a UK-based person. You know, lots of amazing bits of news breaking, fights being made, stuff going on outside of the ring. And with all of that in flux, it's easy to forget that this week the WBC Heavyweight Championship of the World is being contested in a fight that, if we're honest, has really flown under the radar, I guess you could say. Chris Arreola versus Deontay Wilder. Now, before discussing this fight, I have to give the context. Deontay Wilder was due to fight Alexander Povetkin, as we all know. I think there's no disagreement that was a top class fight. I'm not going to go into it because we've been there before on the channel and we don't need to go into it again. For whatever reason, that fight has no longer occurred. Now, because of that, and because of the fact that Deontay Wilder wanted to stay active, I don't begrudge him taking an easier fight. Because he's going to need to bring in an opponent at short notice. He's going to need to get someone into a fight and get into the ring ASAP. And with that in mind, I can understand why they've brought in Chris Arreola. You know, it's a bit disappointing. Chris Arreola wasn't a ranked fighter. He wasn't, as far as I'm aware, in the WBC top 15. Personally, he's not in my top 40 heavyweights in terms of my current rankings. But Arreola does bring certain things to the table. He's a recognisable name. He's a guy who gets involved in entertaining fights. I believe he's something of a sort of fan favourite and ticket seller in America. And let's be honest, he's been in decent fights over the years. We saw him against Vitaly Klitschko. We've seen him against Bermane Stiverne. Even more recently, you know, he's been in wars in the ring. And I guess he's a guy who is known, who's well recognised by the public out there. And I can see why they've chosen Chris Arreola. For me, Arreola's a guy who has never really lived up to his potential. Looking at him in terms of skill, I believe his potential was always probably sub-elite. I don't believe he ever had the potential to be on the level of the Klitschko brothers, on the level of a Tyson Fury. You know, I believe his skills, his natural athleticism was below those sort of individuals. But Arreola, when he looks back at his career, for me, will have regrets. Certainly up to this stage of his career. I mean, that may change if he knocks out Deontay Wilder. But Arreola will have regrets. You know, he's had a career that's been marred with being out of shape, being very overweight for fights. I believe there's been a recent drug ban for marijuana. You know, and there's the sort of suspicion that he perhaps could have done better. He perhaps could have been a better fighter had he lived the life of a fighter a bit more and had he taken it more seriously. Nevertheless, with all that being said, Arreola on his day isn't actually a terrible fighter. He does carry decent power. Obviously, he's a very big man and he throws bombs. He has some semblance of skills. You know, if you watch the Bermane Stiverne fight, I know Stiverne was able to hurt Arreola in the fights and, you know, break his nose and drop him on occasion, etc. But, you know, before those injuries occurred, Arreola had periods of success in those fights, let's put it that way. And I think Arreola is a decent fighter who, if he, you know, lived the life and really dedicated him to the sport, could have been top 10, top 15, that sort of level. Regardless, it's hard to see him beating Deontay Wilder. And I mean, let's have it right. I've been chatting about this fight for a few minutes now, and I've got to say, clearly this is not a competitive fight. I think one of the bookmakers has 16-1 against Chris Arreola, and I'd say that's about right. You know, Deontay Wilder, there's still concerns that remain over his durability, over his chin. He's only gone the distance once against Bermane Stiverne, and you'd think if these guys squared off 17 times, at one point Chris Arreola would catch him, and at one point Chris Arreola may be able to hurt him. But I think those odds are probably representative of Arreola's chances in the fight. Arreola's a smaller man. He's a less athletic man. He's a guy who takes the sport less seriously. I don't believe he has the skills of Deontay Wilder. And whilst Arreola can crack a bit, don't get me wrong, Wilder can punch. And Wilder probably has the power advantage in this fight. Now, on the podcast yesterday, I stated that when I started this channel, there were these two American prospects that everyone was hyping, Seth Mitchell and Deontay Wilder. And we saw Arreola being able to totally expose Seth Mitchell. due to Seth Mitchell's suspect durability and fundamental lack of skills. But I believe Deontay Wilder, even with the fact that he's got a thin resume at the elite level, I think Deontay Wilder has shown that he has skills well above and beyond the likes of Seth Mitchell, and to be fair, well above and beyond the likes of Arreola. We've seen disciplined boxing from Deontay Wilder. We've seen the fact that he has improved in his versatility in the ring. He's no longer just a straight 1-2. You know, he throws other punches in there. We've seen him develop a lead left hook, a Klitschko-esque lead left hook. We've seen him bring up the fight up close. We've seen him throw an uppercut. We've seen him try and fight on the inside a bit more. We've seen him push the pace. Also in the Stavern fight, we saw him on his back foot a bit. You know, I think Deontay Wilder is a better fighter than many people, potentially including myself, initially thought. And the other thing about Deontay Wilder is I know people are very critical of his chin because he was sparked in the amateurs and, you know, because he's been dropped by journeymen in early stages of his career. But for me, whilst Deontay Wilder is a guy who has suspect balance, you know, his stance is suspect, which exacerbates that problem. I think rumours of how bad his chin are slightly exaggerated, if I'm honest. Yeah, we saw Bermain Stavern land on him. We've seen other fighters land on him. And, you know, whilst he may have had a few problems in his early fights, when was the last time you saw Deontay Wilder go down? And I'm not saying the level of opposition he's been in with has been a murderer's row, but we saw Stavern badly able to hurt Arreola, for example. And yet, Stavern to me didn't look like he was about to knock Deontay Wilder out. We saw Johan Depart badly knock out the undefeated Robert Helenius. You know, we never saw him able to hurt Wilder. So I think there's a lot going for Wilder. And I think whilst Arreola has the potential to make this interesting for a round or two, I think fundamentally he'll get stopped. And I think he'll probably get stopped around 4 or 5, something of that nature. I can see him charging at Deontay Wilder in the early rounds. I can see him like a bull putting his head down and bum rushing Deontay Wilder. I can see him forcing the pace and throwing big bombs. And I can see Deontay Wilder wanting to be patient, you know, not wanting to get involved into a scrap. And as a result, potentially looking a bit awkward in there. You know, Wilder, as I say, I think there's some fundamental problems with Wilder's balance. I think there's some fundamental problems with his stance. I believe his stance is too wide, which means he gives up his height a bit and is unable to make small, subtle changes to his movement. You know, I think his stance is so wide, he can't shuffle his feet by an inch. You know, he moves by a mile at a time. And I think that gives him the impression of being a bit ungainly, a bit unbalanced. And, you know, when he's going back, sometimes he can look very awkward. And I've always suspected, like a real skilled, slick boxer, you know, when Wilder's going back and when they've got him on the back foot, will be able to catch him. But I don't see Chris Arreola as that sort of guy at this stage of his career. I think Arreola is going to charge at him, throw looping, predictable, telegraphed punches. And I think as long as Deontay Wilder stays disciplined, he'll survive the first 2 or 3 rounds. And when he does that, I think Arreola will quickly start to gas. Wilder's jab will start to become effective in the fight. And I think Wilder's going to have huge advantages in terms of boxing, range, athleticism, power, skill fundamentally. And I think we'll start to see Wilder time Arreola. You know, Arreola for me, he's a guy who's been in a lot of wars, a lot of miles on the clock. And I think once that Wilder power punch starts to land 2 or 3 times, it could be an early night. And I'm thinking, I'm going to go 5th round for a stoppage here. I think Deontay Wilder's going to get him out of there. Chris Arreola's not without any hope. He's got a puncher's chance. He's got the classic puncher's chance. You know, I don't know how much he weighs, but 18 stone, experienced fighter, decent KO ratio, against a guy who, Deontay Wilder, who has got a huge undefeated streak, a world champion for a long time now, but fundamentally is still untested at the top level. And I know Chris Arreola these days is certainly not the top level, but, you know, there's still a bit of testing for Deontay Wilder out there. And as a result, you know, I'm not going to completely rule Chris Arreola out of this, but I think the bookies have got it right at about 16 to 1. I expect Arreola, like Shannon Briggs, to be dangerous for a round or 2. And then I expect Deontay Wilder will quicken up the pace, and I think he'll be able to get him out of there. Let me know your thoughts on this fight, guys. Is there anyone predicting the upset? Does anyone see Arreola have any success here? What are your thoughts on the fight? Leave your comments below, whether you agree with what I'm saying, whether you disagree with what I'm saying. If you've enjoyed the video, please hit the thumbs up button. And if you're new to the channel, or if you haven't done so already, I'd really appreciate it if you press subscribe. Many thanks for watching, guys. Hope everyone's doing well.